first time at Toastmaster?
It is.
Hine.
Yes, be kind to me, please. Welcome. The theme of our meeting today is Peace Through Strength. And given that and the fact that Memorial Day is coming up in a couple of weeks, I thought I'd tell a little tale about a historical event that may not have happened had we been stronger than we were in the late 1930s. Does anyone know the significance of the date April 18th, 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor? That was the date that Jimmy Doolittle led a flight of 16 B-25 Mitchell twin-engine medium bombers off the deck of the aircraft carrier Hornet in the Pacific and bombed Tokyo in one of the most daring and dangerous military missions in U.S. military history. The raid didn't do a lot of damage as such, but it had horrendous psychological benefit on both sides of the Pacific. In the U.S., it basically woke up the nation that had been in a deep funk since Pearl Harbor, and it was a huge morale boost. To the Japanese, it forced their planners for the rest of the war to keep some of their resources closer to the home islands than it would have otherwise. It was an amazing mission. B-25s weren't supposed to be able to fly off the deck of an aircraft carrier, much less with 2,000 pounds of bombs and enough fuel for a 12-hour flight. And the top military planners had considered it a suicide mission for the 80 crew members that flew the mission. Just a little aside, one of the Doolittle Raiders, the pilot of the number 12 aircraft, lived in the Table Mesa area of Boulder from 1966 till he passed away about 3 years ago. Anyway, miraculously, most of the Doolittle Raiders survived the mission. They bailed out of their B-25s in a rainstorm at night over Japanese-occupied China. Over the course of the next month, they made their way back to friendly lines with the help of the Chinese resistance. During that period of time, Jimmy Doolittle thought that he was going to get court-martialed because he lost all of his airplanes. Instead, Roosevelt gave him the Congressional Medal of Honor and promoted him 2 ranks to general. Shortly after the war, the Doolittle Raiders started having annual reunions. And early on in the reunion process, somebody donated to them a very classy mahogany wooden case in which were stored goblets, 80 goblets, each of which had the name of a Doolittle Raider on it. And at the annual reunion every year, they would turn over the goblets of those who had died in the past year and have a toast to all of those who had gone before. In addition, they kept a very special bottle of cognac. It was very expensive and rare, and it was bottled in 1896, the year of Jimmy Doolittle's birth. The tradition called for when the Doolittle Raiders were too old to hold their reunions anymore, or there were only a couple of them left, they would have one final toast with that bottle of cognac to celebrate all those who had gone before. That toast took place this past November. It was held at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, and in front of about 500 invited guests that included the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of the Doolittle Raiders, and the descendants of the Chinese that had helped them get back to friendly lines during the war. There were also military brass and historians there. The final primary speaker was General Mark Walsh, I believe his name was, and he's the current Chief of Staff of the Air Force, highest ranking general in the Air Force. When he first came to the microphone, he indicated that having been asked to speak at this event was the greatest professional honor of his life. He then talked a little bit about the raid, but then toward the end of his speech, he turned to the 3 rickety old aviators sitting next to him on the stage, all in their mid to late 90s, and said in a sometimes shaky voice, and I think at sometimes he was almost in tears, he told about how in the 1950s, growing up as a child, he had read the book and seen the movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which was about the Doolittle Raid and which was instrumental in him making a career out of the Air Force. He then talked about in 1991 being present at the final briefing of the bomber crews that were about to launch the first Gulf War with the sneak attack on Baghdad. The last thing the commanding officer said before the air crews took their airplanes was, "Make the Doolittle Raiders proud." Then he read an email he'd gotten that morning from the commandant at the Air Force Academy, which read to the effect, "The Doolittle Raiders had set the standard by which all Air Force Academy cadets and graduates are still measured today." And about 5 minutes later, the 117-year-old bottle of cognac was opened, and the 3 surviving Doolittle Raiders had their final toast to all of those that had gone before. And with that, the final bookend was placed on the saga of the Doolittle Raid, one of the most dangerous and daring missions in U.S. military history. Okay, moving on to the meeting.